Okay, could you take us through how you would set up Easy-NMOS from the Ubuntu command line?
Okay, so what you can see here is my system's screen. What I have is a base Ubuntu 20.04 installation up and running. And hopefully we can just take you through the 1, 2, 3 step in terms of getting Easy-NMOS running. So first and foremost, I need to install some dependencies. So I want to install Git because I need to clone the Easy-NMOS repository. And I actually know that Easy-NMOS, or the install script of Easy-NMOS, actually needs curl. So I'm going to install that as well. So let's just wait for that to finish. It'll take a couple of seconds. Okay, nearly there. It's just doing the completion. Must be going a little bit slow. There we go. Right. Okay. So I now have Git installed and I also have curl installed. So let's just check where we are. So let's clone the repository. So if you go to github.com/rhasty/easy-nmos.git. Okay, and that's pulled everything in, and you should now have a new directory in the system called Easy-NMOS. So let's go in there. Okay, and basically we've now done the clone. Okay, so the next step is to use the install script. Okay, and what this will effectively do is install Docker and Docker Compose. So this can take a little bit of time because it's doing lots of updates. It's installing lots of things, but we can run through it. You can see here it's now doing an installation of the precursors, so CA certificates, curl, etc. for Docker. Interestingly, we are not using the Docker implementation that's packaged with Ubuntu, because what we've tried to do is make this as flexible as possible. So the implementation has been done using Docker CE, or the community edition. So you can see here that we're installing this directly from Docker, not relying on the packages built into Ubuntu 20.04. And the reason for that is we want to make this, at least viable for, different Linux implementations and other implementations as well. So, right, so we have a few things installed now. That's complete. So we should now be able to do Docker version. Okay, actually I need to do this with a sudo because I haven't got permissions yet. So you can see here that we now have the Docker engine installed. Okay, and we should also have Docker Compose installed. So let's probably need to do the sudo first. Okay, perfect. Now, as you've seen, I had to sudo those commands. So what we can do is you can do a little trick here where you can create a Docker group on your Linux implementation. So it already exists. And if I do this, lowercase g, capital G, Docker, and what I'm doing here is this $user is effectively my account. Okay, so what effectively I've done there is I've added my user, which is rhasty, to the Docker account. So let's just see if this works. Okay, unfortunately, what we've got to do now is just do a quick reboot so that implementation can actually take effect. So let's just reboot the server. Okay, so the server's rebooted and come back. So let's just fire up my terminal again. Okay, so we now have the terminal functioning. you can see that the Easy-NMOS directory is there. So let's go back into that. And let's just make sure that that adjustment is taken. So yes, I can now do Docker version without sudo, and I should be able to do Docker compose version without sudo as well. And there we go. Perfect. So the next step, or step 2, is we need to edit the Docker compose YAML file. So let's do that. Okay. So in here, I'm just going to show you the respective places that you need to edit things. I actually already have a 192.168.6 network available and functional, so I actually don't need to do this, but basically we can just step through it. So this is the first container. So this is the Nmos Registry. Okay, interesting things here is you can see that we define the host name and the domain name, and these are used for the MDNS references if you want to use the MDNS names associated with these containers. So you can see, or you will see, that each of them has these defined. Okay, but the important thing here in terms of configuration is adjusting this IP address. So this is the first IP address that you need to change. So I now know that my Nmos registry and controller is on 192.168.6.101. So moving down a little bit further, you can see in exactly the same way we configure the Nmos virtual node. So again, the Nmos virtual node is on 192.168.6.102. It's a completely separate IP address. Okay. And finally, we have the Nmos testing container, and this is on a third IP address here, which is 192.168.6.103. So the 3 containers are now on .101, 102, 103. You can also note that you can see that we specify depends on here. So what we're doing is we're defining the start order of these containers so that the registry starts first, then the virtual node, then the Nmos testing container. Okay, now moving on to the last piece, there's 2 key areas here that you need to specify. Firstly, you can see here, this is ENS33 is my physical Ethernet adapter, okay? And you need to specify that as the parent adapter. And the reason for this is you want these containers to be published onto your network so that you can access them externally, okay? And by specifying ENS33, I'm basically stating that that runs on this particular adapter. And finally, you can see here that I've also specified 192.168.6.0, which is the subnet, okay? Now, one thing that you may need to add here is a gateway primitive. I haven't actually had to do this, and it's only needs to be done if the implementation needs to inherit a different gateway address rather than the one that is on your parent adapter. So if you're in a corporate network where you have an unusual gateway, something obscure where you're routing to somewhere else, you may need to below here to add in, let's just type it anyway, gateway, and I'll do 10.10.10.10, for example. Okay, now normally you shouldn't need that, but I'm just making you aware just in case you run into a few issues associated with that. So I don't need to do that because everything is fine on this network and we know it runs. So kind of we now have a base implementation. So let's save that out. In fact, I don't even need to modify it. So let's just show it you, and you can see here there's the text file. That's step 2, it's the configuration. And then the final step should just be a case of running Docker. Actually, I've got a couple of, probably didn't need to do that, but let's just do Docker compose up. Okay, now what you can see here is first step is it's created the external networks. It's now pulling the containers. So you can see it's downloading the containers from the internet and actually decompressing them. Okay, and you can see it's done the Nmos CPP first, and now it's pulling the Nmos testing container, and that one's a little bit bigger, simply because it has a lot more of stuff installed on it, Python and various things to test SSL and all of the different components. It's quite a big package. But once that's downloaded, it'll decompress that, and then it'll then automatically start everything. So I'm hoping in a couple of seconds, when this extraction is finished, we should start to see things burst into life. Okay, so you can see here goes the registry. Now, if you're using a virtual machine, you may see this pop up, and this is just a security thing associated with when you're running on virtual machines. I'm running VMware Fusion here, so I need to do this. It's just an authority thing. But basically, it's now starting the respective containers. So you can see here that you have the color-coded log associated with the containers. So in my case today, the Nmos Registry container is colored blue. The Nmos virtual node container is colored green, and actually off the screen, you've already seen the yellow one, which is the Nmos testing container. And that's basically it, okay? It's up, it's running, it's functional, okay? But just to give you some other tips, let's stop it. You can just Control-C out of this, and it should gracefully shut down the containers, and that can take just a little bit of time, not too long. But some extra commands that you will find useful is some cleanup things. So if you do docker compose down, it'll actually remove the containers in the network. Okay, it's basically a reset. So if you do docker compose down, it basically resets everything, and that's a useful thing to do when you Control-C out of it. Okay, so I've shown you how to start and stop, or step 3, the container, but let's just show you how you access the devices itself. So let's bring everything back up. So let's go for docker compose up. It would help if I could spell. This should be a lot quicker now because it doesn't actually have to go and download things from the internet. And as you can see, it's up. Yeah. We'll just give it a second just to burst into life. Now, everything is up and running. You can see that the registry is there, the virtual node is there, and the Nmos testing container is just starting up. I'm hoping in a second, once it's downloaded the schemas from the internet, you'll just see a burst of yellow in a second, fingers crossed. And that's kind of the last step of the jigsaw. Let's just make sure, let's just scroll back and make sure it started successfully. Just going back to where I actually executed everything. Gone off the screen, which is there's the virtual node starting. There we go. So it did actually start. So let's just scroll back. Okay. And there you can see that the Nmos testing container finished its start. Okay. So now once you have that up and running, you want to use an external device. Okay. So I'm going to minimize that. Okay. And I'm going to use my Mac to do this. So let's just clear this. Let's go to a website, for example. Okay. Now, what you should be able to do is do the respective different MDNS names. So let's go for Nmos Registry Local. Okay, and you can see now that you're actually accessing the registry itself. And to get to the container, you just simply click on admin here. Okay, and that will download the JavaScript controller into your browser. So let's just click here, and you can see that we have the registry that's up and running, and you can actually see that the virtual node itself has already registered as well. So let's just take a peek at that. So if I do nmos virt node.local, okay, you're now talking to that other IP address, the virtual node, and you can see here that you actually have the node xnmos APIs. So if you want to explore how a node behaves, you can see node, which is ISO 4, connection ISO 5, events, which is ISO 7, channel mapping ISO 8, etc. So you can see all of that there. And then just to make sure that we have this complete, if we do nmos-testing.local, but because we use port 5000, which is the testing tool port, you need to specify that. Okay, and you can now see that you're accessing the testing tool. Okay, so you now have basically everything up and running. You can see what's going on in the left-hand panel here. So whether that's in the registry virtual node or the testing tool, and on the right-hand side, using an external browser, you can access all of the 3 containers and components. So let's run a simple test just to make sure that everything is up and running. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick on the registration or the registry test. So I'm going to use ISO 4. Okay, so let's start specifying a few things here. So if I say registry local and it's port 80, and the query API is also the same, and port 80. And if you click run, what you're going to see on the left-hand side now, hopefully, is all of the tests running against the registry. So you're going to see it go wild. Okay, and off it goes. You can see here that the registry is now reporting all of these tests as the testing tool is interacting with the registry. And this typically takes 60, 90 seconds to run through all of the tests. ISO 4 is probably, the ISO 4 registry test is probably one of the most complicated ones. But what you can see here is all of the different tests running. You can see the responses coming from the registry in this window. And in fact, let's just, so you can see it a little bit better. So let's go full screen. And this is testing lots and lots of different things. So it's testing the registration API, it's testing the node API, and all of the communications in and out of the registry. It's testing other things such as subscriptions and other bits and pieces as well. And this, you can see it executing here very, very nicely. So what I'm actually looking for here now is the orange response from the testing tool. And there it is. You can see that you've now got the orange response. Okay, so let's defocus that. And actually you can now see the response from the testing tool and all of the different tests and that they've passed. Okay, and some of them have been disabled because of the base mode that we're running the testing tool in, but you can see pretty much across the board that some of the tests outside of the ones that are outside of the ones that are not implemented or disabled, you can see that we pass everything and there's no red flags. So that's an example of how you can run the testing tool. If you want to go back, you can just go back, click back here. So just click there and you go back and you can repeat the test. Okay, so as an example, you can see that we have the controller, you have the, let's go back, you have the registry API, you have the virtual node API under the XNMOS tree, and you have the NMOS testing tool. So complete set, and everything can be run. Whether that's using these virtual devices or whether you want to actually test third-party or your own hardware, it's all available.